Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the associate political editor for The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. But now let's see what is on some of those front pages. Dawn's blood on his hands. That's the front of the Mirror, as Russian President Putin is found to be morally responsible for the death of Dawn Sturgis. The Guardian leads with Reform UK leader Nigel Farage hitting out at broadcasters for questioning him about claims of racism and anti-Semitism during his school days. That story on the front of the Daily Mail too. The paper says the Reform leader is turning tables on the BBC in a row about racism. The Financial Times leads on Reform UK receiving a record £9 million donation from businessman Christopher Harborne, the UK's biggest donation to a political party by a living donor. The Telegraph reports that Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy has suggested that rejoining the EU customs union would boost economic growth just days after the PM ruled it out. The Eye leads with Science Secretary Liz Kendall saying it's ignorant to call Labour the party of welfare. The Express says the NHS faces a tidal wave of flu as cases hit a record high for this time of the year. The Metro says welcome to the Quake District after a 3.3 magnitude tremor rocked the Lake District. The Sun leads of former MasterChef presenter John Turode on dealing with the grief of being axed from the show. And the Star finds reasons to rejoice about Joe Root's first century in Australia at the Ashes. And we are joined tonight by Henry and Rachel. Welcome both. It's great to have you. Lots of different sorts of stories. Let's start with the front page of The Guardian. That's the Novichok Salisbury inquiry findings. Henry, if I can start with you. Two sides to this. President Putin found to be morally responsible, but questions also asked of the government and how it was dealt with.
Yeah, although I'm not entirely sure what those questions are. So it says here, relatives of Dawn Sturgis, the lady who was killed, have expressed concern, saying it has not set out how such a tragedy could be prevented in future. But, I mean, this tragedy is so specific. You have two Russian agents with a very rare nerve agent who negligently leave it lying around. Somebody picks it up, gives it as a gift to them. Like, what government strategy is supposed to prevent that from happening? There are criticisms, I think some legitimate criticisms about the protection offered to Sergei Skripal himself. Because that's the thing that the government can reasonably do if you're protecting somebody who you know to be under threat from a murderous foreign power. But some of the other criticisms, I mean, this is essentially the problem with the way that we do inquiries. This is what, 7 or 8 years after the event now. The main conclusion is that Putin is responsible, which I think most people concluded on day one. And it hasn't satisfied people, and there are these endless calls for something to be done. Sometimes the world is a dangerous place and bad things happen in it.
Before going to you, do you think then, Henry, that the inquiry wasn't worth doing?
I think that the way that most inquiries we do in Britain are not worth doing because they take far, far too long. There are ways to do them that are much more effective, that can take a year or less, get things much quicker. So 5, 6 years for an inquiry, they're mostly catharsis theatre.
Rachel?
I think what we did get from the inquiry, one, we got that this was orchestrated by the Russian government, by Putin, which, again, we did know that, but it is still something to have an inquiry of this force make it very, very plain that this was Vladimir Putin ordering this attack. But two, I think it's a reminder of exactly what happened here, which is that a British woman who had no link to Russia whatsoever was murdered on British soil by Russian agents in what could be considered an act of overt aggression. And this is 2018. If we look at the response of the Theresa May government at the time, we expelled 23 Russian diplomats who were thought to possibly have been spies. There was some freezing of Russian assets. But what message did we send to Moscow about whether or not this was acceptable? Not really anything, and I think something that comes through from the report, some of the language used about how this was a public demonstration of Russian state power and its both international and domestic impact. This was a signal. This was a signal of Russian hostility. We didn't really do anything. We've had numerous stories this week alone about Russian spies entering the UK on cargo ships to spy on British military operations. We've had reports, I think, last week of a Russian submarine spying on our undersea cables and sending lasers towards our pilots. We've got issues with drones. We've got our Defence Secretary now saying that we have to prepare for the fact that this is active hostility. We knew all of this 7 years ago with this attack that was pretty much unprecedented, and we're very slow to act about it.
And obviously tragic for Dawn Sturgis and her family, but it could have been a lot worse if that bottle of perfume that was actually Novichok had,
it could have got into
spread.
the water
Yeah,
supply.
It
It could have killed an entire city.
Let's go to the Eye now. Liz Kendall there saying that it's ignorant to call Labour the party of welfare. What do you make of that, Henry?
I mean, it's her defence here is that they are nonetheless increasing welfare spending, but that most of the people getting the welfare spending are in work, or at least a lot of them are in work, and they're simply on low pay. That's almost a definitional dispute, because the government has literally put taxes up to increase welfare spending. That's not really disputable. I think that what the minister is trying to tackle is the idea that there is this hard line between people on welfare and people in work, which is a fair enough observation. I think that the reason that the two-child limit was and remains incredibly popular with voters. And that's why the Conservatives have committed to bring it back in. And it says explicitly here that Kendall is repudiating Kemi Badenoch on that. But the reason for that is that for a lot of families who are working but aren't on welfare, they have to make really, really difficult decisions about whether or not they think they can afford a second child. And the inherent unfairness that George Osborne very cannily spotted when he brought this rule in is that people didn't think it was fair for the families who pay for the welfare system to have to face those choices when families on welfare don't.
Of course, Liz Kendall here says we're the party that backs kids and their future. If kids grow up poor, it's terrible for them and the country as a whole.
Well, the polling is interesting because Henry's right that there is polling that shows that if you ask the question that way, the majority of the British public, including a majority of Labour voters, go, yes, it's not fair that people who work should pay for people who don't. But if you ask the question a different way and say, is it fair that children grow up in poverty through no fault of their own, you get a much more nuanced answer. And there's also the economic case, which Rachel Reeves tried to make in the budget. I thought she did a pretty good job of it, actually, although I haven't heard it as much from Labour since then, about whether you think it's fair or not. Children in poverty cost all of us as a society and as future taxpayers significantly more over the course of their life, because it shows up in hospital admissions, it shows up in welfare when they're older, in lost educational outcomes, in productivity. That's a very cold economic case, but there is reasoning for saying let's intervene early before you even get to is it right that children go hungry.
Just looking at the headline, though, ignorant to call Labour the party of welfare. I mean, it depends, how a headline is written. But do you think that they're rattled by this accusation, or just in general by the response to the budget, Henry?
Well, yeah, this is because a Labour chancellor could, and historically, Labour chancellors have stood up and said we're going to raise taxes to increase welfare. The government was very, very shy about doing that. That's the reason that Rachel Reeves got caught out with all of that furore about the black hole, right?
Rachel, briefly, do you think?
I think they're trying to pitch two messages at once. One is that it's not about welfare, that's to the public at large, and then one is to the Labour base, that Labour is a party that cares about fixing child poverty. Fundamentally, a Labour government that allows child poverty to rise over the course of the Parliament, that's pretty unprecedented. That goes fundamentally against what people expect a Labour government to do.
Is that relative or absolute poverty?
I don't think that distinction is necessarily helpful when you're arguing an election that you let child poverty rise.
Because you can lift children out of relative poverty by confiscating money from people and burning it, right? Like, you're not doing anything to actually improve those children's life chances.
But this is doing
it does matter which one we're
chances.
talking about when we're using that figure.
Okay. Let's go to another divisive topic, Brexit, which is front page of the Daily Telegraph. And this is David Lammy. Here it says breaks ranks on Brexit, saying that joining the customs union will boost growth. Rachel, there just seems to be so much talk all of a sudden. Am I wrong? Is it just a perception? All of a sudden, Brexit is sort of back.
It's back, baby.
Or is it?
Well, firstly, I'm not quite sure about this headline, because David Lammy didn't exactly break ranks on Brexit. He just didn't rule something out. And I think there is a slight difference there. But fundamentally, the government needs growth, right? It came in at the election saying we're going to grow the economy. It hasn't done a brilliant job of doing that. One of the widely understood levers that you could pull to grow the economy is closer ties with the EU, our largest bloc as a trading partner, and you are increasingly getting David Lammy, Wes Streeting, some of the government's own economists being like, you want growth, there's a lever right here. I was actually at an event with George Osborne earlier this evening, Tory Chancellor, and his advice to the Labour government was, this is the lever that you need to pull, and politically it would put the Conservatives in a difficult position, he argued, Reform not so much, if you got to an election in 3 years' time and growth had been boosted by joining the customs union, you put the Conservatives in the position of going, we want to undo this thing that you did that's made the economy better. Henry's not convinced.
No.
Well, I mean, it's amazing that somebody who was in the Remain campaign, tried that logic and lost, would then just still be like, no, this time, guys, this time it'll really do it. So what would actually reopening the customs union involve? Because the sensible way to do any realignment with Europe is just to do it in really lots and lots of little deals that no one really notices, because...
Which is what they've been doing.
Yeah, exactly. That's called having Europe à la carte, and Brexiteers at the time were mocked for supporting it.
I think it's called friends with benefits.
Another way of putting it, perhaps. But, realistically, what are you going to do if you reopen the Brexit question? Labour is, like both of the big parties, torn between two very different electorates. It's worried about losing its Liberal supporters to the Greens, and so that militates, maybe we should talk about Brexit. But Reform came second in 98 seats. 89 of them are held by Labour, right? There are hundreds of Labour MPs who would be absolutely horrified if Labour chose to reopen the Brexit question, because it's the one thing, Reform's currently plateaued a bit in the polls, it's the one thing that both the Tories and Reform would really, really love to happen, would be a repolarising of politics around that question.
Because obviously it's a question linked to migration, which takes me to another story in the Daily Telegraph, which says migrant children can be deported. So children of failed asylum seekers will be deported even if they've been born in the UK, and this is according to a Home Office minister, Rachel.
Yes, and I think this is going to be tricky for Labour, which is, again, they're trying to walk a delicate balance by going, we're not Reform. We think Reform's stance on migration, on things like revoking people's right to indefinite leave to remain, on things like some of the comments about just sending all the asylum seekers back. We think that's cruel and inhumane. We want to stay in the ECHR. At the same time, we're going to create an asylum policy that is significantly tougher than anything we've seen in British politics recently. I think this is it's highly emotive. You're basically saying that you're going to deport children, There is a reason that in these debates, politicians try very, very hard not to talk about women and children, and this is the reason.
Very briefly.
This is simply bringing our refugee policy in line with the rest of British citizenship policy. The UK does not have birthright citizenship. Very few countries in the whole Eastern Hemisphere have birthright citizenship. This is talking about children who haven't grown up here for a very long time. They're people who are explicitly of asylum seekers whose claims get rejected. And that's entirely proper. We don't want the asylum system to be a backdoor through the immigration system. These people are not British citizens.
All right. Henry, Rachel, stay with us, because coming up, we've spoken a lot about reform. We'll keep on talking about Nigel Farage and his criticism of the BBC and ITV, following questions over claims of racism and anti-Semitism during his school days.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Mayhem in the Middle East, rippling in America's West.
Get back! Get back!
The resolve of these protesters is now being seriously tested. I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests.
None of this is a peaceful protest.
I'm Martha Kellner, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support, but it's nasty out there. Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from the UK?
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
President Biden, do you trust President Xi? President Biden says that this meeting went well. He said real progress was made on a whole host of issues. Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
There's no doubt that Kamala Harris and her team are harnessing the power of social media. Do you think Kamala is brat?
Kamala's brat.
Were you scared?
Yeah, we were scared. It was terrible. Strong wind, building tearing down.
As them say, our God works, so we can't do nothing.
The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. Sky News, get the full story first. Free wherever you get your news. Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force.
It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me in the studio, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Socio-Political Editor for The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. Let's go straight to The Guardian, and a story that's been rumbling for a couple of days now. The headline there, Farage hits out as fresh claims of vindictive teenage racism emerge. Now, these are claims against Nigel Farage that when he was at school in Dulwich College, and Rachel, I'll start with you, that he made racist and anti-Semitic comments, and then it sort of all blew up in a news conference today.
I'm not entirely sure why this story is on the front page again today, because Nigel Farage held a press conference that I'm pretty sure, I got the memo for it, was meant to be talking about cancelled elections, nothing to do with this, and he just decided to lose it at a BBC reporter and then go off on a bit of a rant about how the BBC broadcast stuff that we would now consider very problematic in the 70s and 80s. So it's fine that he was a racist at school, possibly, while also saying that he didn't think that he had made any comments that were racist anti-Semitic at school.
So he didn't say. What he says is that he had not made racist or anti-Semitic remarks in a malicious or nasty
he said he
way.
hadn't done it with malice. So firstly, how does he know? You never know when you comment like that how people will have taken it.
But malice is intent.
But you have no idea how they would interpret those.
But when he says with malice, that's a question of intent, which he would know.
OK, so he didn't do it with malice, but if they're upset about it, it's in their heads. But secondly, just the entire row about this, like, all he had to do is say, I was stupid, I was at school, I said some un-PC things, I'm sorry if I upset anyone, I'm sorry, I wouldn't say those things now. Instead, he's just turned this into a row just as it was starting to cool down and lashed out at the BBC about it.
There's sort of two things. There's the claims, the accusations against him, and then it's what we saw today at the news conference and him hitting out at the BBC and ITV. What did you make of that spat, Henry?
I mean, I think that it is... The whole thing is slightly ridiculous. Like, did Nigel Farage say terrible things at school? I mean, my confidence would 95%, probably. His argument is essentially that, one, and this is where his comments about the BBC airing things, is essentially that social mores change, that he was never a member of a far-right group and that he never said these things with intent to wound or is expressing genuine racist sentiment, but the language conventions of the time were different. I suppose a comparison would be when I was at school in sort of 2005, 2006, the word gay meant generally bad, right? And so, you know, if you missed your train or a shop was shut, you might say, oh, gay. Now, Was that said with intent to wound? No. Did it probably wound gay people who heard it? Yes. So that's the kind of problem that we're in here. But I think that it's just, there's a real siege mentality that we see with Reform UK. I mean, because even if you think about the actual topic of what they were meant to be talking about, it's the idea that Labour cancelled these elections specifically because Reform UK were going to win. So they do have the sense that everyone's out to get them, but the whole point of Farage is that he's not meant to do this. He's meant to be the one who's in control and
meant
good
to brush
at the media.
it off.
Yeah, so it's weird that it's rattled him.
And it's reminded everyone what it is that he actually said, which wasn't the case of using a word that was acceptable then and now isn't acceptable. Was a case of hissing at Jewish students to remind them of the gas chambers. I don't think that was particularly widespread.
No, sorry, I was explaining what his line was rather than what the actual comments.
He's certainly still feeling the pressure from the story, and it's still front page news. But there's another reason why Reform was actually in the headlines. So you say that the elections, but then if we look at the Financial Times, a massive donation. Rachel, £9 million. It's made British history.
Yeah, 9 million, the largest donation from a single person in British electoral history. And if you look at, you had this on your screen about half an hour ago, if you look at like the makeup of donations to Reform UK since it was founded, this is like dwarfs all of them. And it's fine though, because Nigel Farage said, hand on heart, I have not promised him a thing in return for this donation. So, you know, that's all fine then. I think, like, our political system, we're not America. We've managed quite well without these, like, mega donations from millionaires and billionaires around the world. We don't inject that kind of money into our politics. I think it's OK to ask questions about it.
I mean, you know, it's obviously not against the rules. Henry, what do you make of it?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about, I mean, the unions give Labour far less money and get the Employment's Right Bill out of it quite explicitly. So, you know, the idea that
Labour MPs are quite keen on that too.
Yeah, but the unions fund the Labour Party and they get policy they want from the Labour Party. That's literally just how that donation relationship works. So I don't think that it's particularly becoming to object to it on one side and not the other. What this really represents is they've crossed the credibility threshold, essentially. They've outraised the Tories. That's a major problem.
Henry, I'm so sorry, we're going to fall off air otherwise. Henry, Rachel, I'll see you both in the 11. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, a report into the Novichok poisoning of Don Sturgis says Vladimir Putin is morally responsible.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.